Greetings, everyone. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we played an epic finale. We, as Arthas, stopped Illidan, Kael'thas, and Lady Vaj from destroying the Lich King, Ner'zhul, and then we merged with him and became the Lich King as Arthas, the person that we will know and fear in Wrath of the Lich King. We then got to see a cinematic of all that happening. We had a little bit of some tension as the mission itself was no pushover, and then we got to watch a rocking concert by some late '90s, early 2000s metal. With some interesting choices in Horde. It was a Horde band, just so you know. The Alliance, they're more like a Taylor Swift vibe. The Horde goes full on somewhere in between Creed and Metallica. So stay a while and listen as we wrap up all of Warcraft 3's content. We will have 3 episodes, including this one, of finishing this section of Chronicles, which just kind of wraps up the aftermath and things maybe we missed over. And then we'll play the bonus levels, which really the bonus levels are happening in that space in between Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft. We will have some lore that we'll get to, and I'll spell out the exact things that are going to come before we can start World of Warcraft. But there is one novel in there, so we have a little bit of time. But as soon as we finish the next 6 episodes, even when we begin that lore, we're also going to start doing something I've had my eyes set on for a few months now, which is going back and doing all of the things I skipped. So there is a wealth of lore that is either considered non-canon, or it's tangential to the main material, or it's like small and just maybe stating the things we already know, but in a less buttoned up form. So Chronicles is very nice and polished, but there's Dwellpedia, which is very it's very useful, and you never know what kind of nugs we'll find if we dig in there. So I'm going to start alternating when I get to the World of Warcraft material, where every other episode we're going to break off and do one of these little more obscure or potentially non-canon little bits of material. But all that aside, let's wrap up. So we have the Fracturing of the Light. Here we go. After Arthas Menethil merged with the Lich King, he remained in Northrend. The task of commanding the Scourge in Lordaeron fell to Kel'Thuzad. Though Sylvanas Windrunner and her Forsaken were entrenched in the Undercity, the Lich's undead still dominated much of the Plaguelands. Yet there was one troublesome enemy that constantly vied for control of Kel'Thuzad's domain. The Order of the Silver Hand had been devastated by the war with the Scourge, but its remaining paladins banded together and vowed to drive the undead from the land. Among these pious warriors was Alexandros Mograine, wielder of the Ashbringer. The weapon, crafted in Ironforge and infused with the Holy Light, had become a thing of legend. It destroyed any undead that it touched, leaving only ash in its wake. As the paladins waged battle against the Scourge, word of Alexandros' deeds spread. He soon took on the same name as his sword. And we did read that comic series. There was a 3-part comic mini-series, which was really good. I liked it a lot, and it did tell that story. And just because this is happening here, this paragraph, that doesn't necessarily mean this is happening after everything. This could be going on the whole time we did it. So we didn't necessarily read that comic out of order. We'll come back up to Garethos here and then that. The paladins were elusive and resourceful, and the Scourge had little luck defeating them in open combat. While these holy warriors focused their attention on the undead, another foe infiltrated their ranks unseen, Balnazzar. The Dreadlord had succumbed to Sylvanas' forces in the siege on Lordaeron's capital, but he had not been destroyed. He had used the last of his power to flee into the Plaguelands. Without the help of the other Dreadlords, his command over the undead was limited. He kept to the shadows, fearful that the Scourge might one day discover his presence. In the Paladins, Balnazzar saw a means to protect himself, a means to create a new army. Okay, so that does say, oh, right, all that should have been read after this, because if Balnazzar, the Dreadlord that we see in that comic series, has already been defeated, this isn't something he's doing on the side during that time, well, then yes, it does happen after. Also, I think it was Balnazzar, which is the one that Sylvanas made, what's his name, kill the Varimathras. And so obviously he didn't really kill him. And it was a little bit fishy the way he killed his brother there. Balnazzar killed a venerated paladin named Sidon Dathrahan. Remember, that's one of the original first 5. He was also in our Of Blood and Honor novel as a non-converted, but then later on we read the manga and the comic where he's obviously been converted, and he is the person under Balnazzar's control that starts the Scarlet Crusade. And then he assumed his form. In the guise of such a respected holy warrior, the Dreadlord was confident that he could twist most of the paladins into his service, yet there was one he believed was beyond his reach, Alexandros Mograine. The wielder of the Ashbringer embodied piety and valor. The sooner he was gone, the sooner the other paladins would fall under Balnazzar's influence. Over time, the Dreadlord manipulated Alexandros' eldest son, Renault Mograine. He turned the young human to darkness and forced him to commit one of the gravest of acts. Renault murdered his father with the Ashbringer. Yeah. Alexandros' corpse and the Ashbringer sword were later recovered by the Scourge. Kel'Thuzad saw use for both of them. The Lich raised the legendary paladin into undeath and transformed him into an obedient servant. The Ashbringer itself, having been used for such an atrocious purpose, was distorted into an unholy shadow of the sword it had once been. Alexandros' death rocked the paladins. Some of them suspected that a dark force had taken hold of Sidon Dathrahan and his closest followers, but they could not prove it. Their suspicions created divisions between the paladins. The Holy Warriors splintered into 2 separate factions, the Argent Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade. The Argent Dawn held true to the tenets of the light, but its counterpart did not. Balnazzar retained control over the Scarlet Crusade. It was just the army he had been searching for, and it soon became synonymous with corruption and extremism, which all of that we've read between this and the comics, it really is, because it's informative, because the entire time I'm playing World of Warcraft, I didn't really know. I knew that the Scarlet Crusade is corrupt. There's instances where you have to go. There's many quest lines. They have whole regions that spread, and later on in the form of the Scarlet Onslaught as well in Wrath of Lich King, they just, they're bad, and yet they seem to be doing certain things, like fighting the Scourge nonstop. So it's cool to see just how corrupt they are, where that corruption comes from, and why they still want to kill undead. Let's read about the fate of Garithos. Sylvanas Windrunner did not lay siege to Lordaeron's capital alone. Deathrock had ensorcelled Oathmar Garithos and many alliance soldiers. When Sylvanas defeated the Dreadlord, she also liberated the human commander and his forces. Garithos distrusted Sylvanas and her undead, but he saw the Dreadlords as an even greater threat. He agreed to help Sylvanas assault the capital, and she promised to give him control of it in return. Only too late did Garithos learn what a promise from Sylvanas truly meant. After conquering the city, Sylvanas rewarded Garithos with death. Her ghouls feasted on the humans' remains. All they left behind were bones. And I wonder if we will have the bones of Garithos on some quest. Maybe we haven't, I've just forgotten it. That was one of the maybe 5th or 6th mission. So this was something we could have read already. And here we have the aftermath of the Third World War. And this really doesn't give us a lot. This is what's the important part to focus on. Is Dalaran there? Yeah, but it's been obliterated, really. The Silver Pine Forest does exist, brushing up against Gilneas, and we read that she kind of spills, she being Sylvanas, starts spilling her troops down that lake. The biggest changes is that Lordaeron here, which is so-called Lordaeron, is all undead. This whole swath of the continent, that's undead territory. And the Undercity is the major new change. The Plague Lands still exist, Eastern and Western Plague Lands. Quel'Thalas still exists in the form of what becomes the Ghostlands and Elwyn Forest, or whatever it's called. I might be wrong about that. Elwyn Forest might be Stormwind's Forest, but whatever, the little Quel'Thalas city around Silvermoon City. Although there's a giant scar running through this now. The Sunwell is still there at this point, but it is corrupted. It has not been changed yet. There's some changes that we'll have to undergo before Burning Crusade starts. And I believe there's a. Actually, I do think maybe they destroyed it already. Can't remember. I thought we read a part where they said they destroyed it. Maybe that's coming up. And then we have the Broken Isles that were raised. So we know these will come into play in Legion, but they're not even on the map until then. But that is where the Tomb of Sargeras is, which is the tiny broken shore. And then Suramar and all the lands that we will know so well from that expansion, which is one of the better ones. All right, cool. So we've got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. I thank you always, as always, so much. And I thank you always do for watching and for listening. And I look forward to continuing these chronicles and seeing you next time on Lore of Warcraft.